You're going to narrow me down to one?
Just one.
Okay. Well, I think if I only get one, I have to go back to what I referenced with the cows. Okay.
Welcome to Classical Etc., a show that dives into the philosophy, culture, and heart of classical education. You're in the studio with Shane Saxon.
On today's episode, I sat down with Paul Schaeffer and we talked about leadership. What does it mean to lead? And what does leadership have to do with classical education? All this and more in our conversation. If you liked this video, then feel free to follow this show and leave a comment below. Paul, thanks for being here for a second time.
Oh, happy to be here.
I've been wanting to talk with you, and I was joking with you about this a little bit, but it's not really a joke, that I wanted you to come to this podcast where we are going to converse about leadership, the idea of leadership, something I kind of wanted to talk with you about, just get your thoughts on. But I told you beforehand, I wanted you to bring that multi-marketing business guru level energy.
Yes.
One of those guys with like a Britney Spears mic who stands on the stage
right.
and
yells
like,
at people. I'm going to make you successful.
Yeah. Because to me, that's leadership, right?
Yeah, no, that is not. Oh my gosh. That is absolutely not I don't think that's real leadership. That's hype. Okay. That's hype. Now, granted, you can't, leaders that are stoic are hard to get behind.
Sure.
Oftentimes, right?
So you got to have energy is what you're saying.
You do have to have energy. You have to seem excited about what you're, doing. Right. I don't know that that's true in like a corporate setting once you have, thousands of underlings. But if you're trying to start something, you absolutely have to have energy.
Sure.
And I think that's, I think you see that in startup classical schools, right? The ones that really take off, you have some sort of energetic leader.
Yeah.
Now, whether their energy may appear in the fact that they work at starting the school 18 hours a day, or it may appear in, their joviality when they're trying to get up there and give talks to inspire people. But there's something that's driving them.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, your marketing gurus with their Britney Spears mics. I mean, those people are being driven by oftentimes just money.
Yeah.
Right. And their livelihood depends on you buying into this pyramid scheme.
Sure.
But the leader of a school is motivated by something wholly differently.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, they're motivated by, we want your child to be the best human person they can be.
Yeah.
Right. And so you don't need the Britney Spears mic. You do have to have a booming voice oftentimes to get the kids to quiet down.
Yeah. So we can agree that the caricature that you often think of when we talk about leadership as a concept, when we talk about a conversation about leadership, the caricature, the kind of conversation that we're going to have is going to be markedly different because of the things that we're about. And so that's kind of what I want to get to.
Yeah. But think about this. This just occurred to me. Think about this. So the person, the Britney Spears mic marketing guru, I love how we've come up with this title.
But everyone knows exactly what we mean. So.
I think so. Yeah. They could put an image of a person with one of these microphones on the podcast if they need to, right, on the video version. But that guy or gal, when the people that he's motivating, when things get tough, nobody's going to listen to the guy. Right? You follow me on this one? Mm-hmm. So if you have, if he's telling you, I don't know, my mind's going to real estate, right? And you got a guy like, okay, go put, 10 grand down on this house and then do this, that, and the other, and you're like, oh, great. This is great advice. I'm going to go do this. Right. And you go put your life savings down on this house and you're trying to flip it and it won't sell and you're going to end up underwater. You're not going to go back to that guy.
Right.
And ask him for advice.
Right.
Right. Just because he doesn't have that presence where you're like, he's been through it thick and thin. He seems like a huckster.
Right.
Right. So we want to be the kind of leaders that when things aren't going well, people are like, I want to go hear what this guy has to say.
Yeah. And, honestly, that's why I want to have this conversation with you, is because in our working together, I knew you had thoughts because I've seen you lead and I've followed you in various ways. And so that's where I kind of want to start, is let's go back. You have thoughts. Where did they develop? How did you cultivate the ideas that you have about leadership now? Where did they come from? How did your own education play a role in that?
One of the things was that's pivotal just from a personal perspective is my father. He wanted to be an accountant who just crunched numbers, and he got into a position where he was leading his firm, and he went and he started doing research on leadership, right? So leadership books were kind of common in the household, at least like when I would look at his shelf of what you would see. And that kind of always, in a sense, colored the way I saw leadership, was that you can learn to be a leader, and that there are specific principles that you'd want to, engage with. But sort of thinking, academically, or like where this came from an educational perspective, one of the things that I walked out with from my kindergarten, 12 education, early college education, was that liberal arts, which was a broader term than the way we normally specifically mean it in our circles now. But, and I mean, the humanities was about learning who man is, right? So if you're sitting there reading books like Anna Karenina or The Count of Monte Cristo or Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde or, whatever,
right, you're
learning about the different aspects of who man is. History was intentionally taught to focus on the causes and consequences of men's actions. And so when you start to understand how people work, then it becomes a lot easier to lead.
Yeah. So taking the broader view.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's people, the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, I remember reading that, and I just thought it was despicable, because basically how to use people. Right. But I think from a liberal arts perspective, what you try to lead people with is not, I need you to do this so I get this out of you, but it's, I want to bring you to a place of human flourishing. Right. And so I really do want the best thing for you.
Right.
Right. And that means sometimes you have to have really hard conversations. And sometimes you have to, help people see, what, you would be better in this role than this other role. And a lot of times those people, they see it immediately. They're like, oh yeah, yeah, that would fit me a lot better. Right. Because whatever role that they're in, they're struggling, and they're like, that actually seems like something I could do better in.
Right.
And nobody likes to struggle every day, and whatever their role be. But it was really, I think, just that whole understanding. And you have to, if you read a bunch of literature and you read a bunch of history, you realize that there are different people that are better at different things. I think in our democratic society, we think everybody should be good at everything.
Sure.
Which is absolutely and patently false.
Right.
And when you start to realize, oh, some people are better at other things than other people are, you start to go, well, why don't we play to those strengths? And then telling somebody, well, I need you to do this instead of that. It's not a critique of you're bad at that, but you will flourish over here.
Right. Right.
And so as I look back and see, okay, where did certain ideas of leadership come from? I think a lot of them came from, again, this understanding of who man is, and in the intentional way that I thought about or read books, literature, history. But then there's also, what do you see around you, right? Who do you, who are you growing up around, or spending formative years with? And that was one thing that I'll always remember about Cheryl Lowe, was she was once characterized by somebody as a benevolent dictator. And what he meant by that was that she was extremely loving and extremely kind, but what she said went, right? But I think actually one of the keys to her being able to be that way was the fact that she was always willing to listen.
Mm.
And so you surround yourself with people like that, or you happen to be surrounded by them, or, I mean, as she was my teacher when I was like in 4th grade. So,
Right.
it wasn't my choice to be around her,
Right.
but you get surrounded by people like that and you realize, oh, I like the way that person led.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's sort of a whole concoction.
Yeah,
of
I like
things.
how you said, especially that you are bringing people along to human flourishing, because it reminds us of what Jesus taught us, that
Mhm.
leadership as service is a thing that we summarize his teaching about leadership with, and really what that's just summarizing in short is what you're saying, that he brought this incredible concept to the light, that is, leadership is not for me, it's for them.
Mm.
And if you just frame it that way, it does kind of change your perspective.
Yeah, and that's not a natural perspective,
Right.
right? I mean, you think about most monarchs in history, right? It was about them,
Yeah.
right? And the people they led oftentimes paid the price for it, unless you were in that inner circle of people that person liked,
Right.
But that's where you're absolutely right. I mean, Christ brings us this model of servant leadership, and the monarchs, I mean, to go that route, since I brought them up, that really did do well, oftentimes were taking that example and saying, okay,
Right.
let me try to live according to that.
Yeah.
Right.
And to even be able to kind of look at the monarchs or Christ or all these things, that's that reading, that diverse background, the observation of key people in history, tying that all together, relating it to leadership. That's kind of what formed you. It sounds like what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a weird sort of dynamic of the people that strive to get to positions of leadership, I think oftentimes end up being the worst leaders.
Right.
And, I mean, I think that's effectively, that's the same thing Christ is teaching us, right? He was called, right? I mean, second person of the Blessed Trinity incarnated into human flesh, right? But he's very clear. His Father is asking him to do these things. He's not the one saying, I'm the Savior of the world, right? But no, my Father's asking obedience of me to do these certain things. And so that's not to say that nobody should ever say, I want to start a classical school, right? And, this is my endeavor. No, absolutely. But if it's about your how do I say this word?
Aggrandizement.
Yes, thank you. Then it's not going to go well, right? You might get something off the ground, right? But it's going to be built around you, and it's not going to be sustainable. It's not going to be something that when you want to step out, that's going to continue.
Yeah, that's good. So that formed you. I've known you as a formed person. I know you're being formed still, but as a formed person leading, here, when I got here, you were the leader of the schools division. I know that you have a farm that you express leadership in. You have a family. And I'm sure there are other ways that you've expressed leadership. How have you seen leadership be a part of your life? What are the challenges that you've faced? And what are the things that, if you were to call successes or that you think maybe are successes, how would you identify those?
Well, I think there are moments, I guess, I look back on my life and go, I really wanted to be a leader at that time, and I was not ready for it.
Okay.
And looking back and realizing there were times I was content to be in the role I was in and really trying to make that role everything I could make it is really what set me up, I think, to be more of a leader that people trusted later on, because you've been through it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't trust the guy who says, I can, teach you how to be Demosthenes, right? Everybody thinks Demosthenes is a great rhetorician, or was a great rhetorician, because he started off stuttering, right? And when you've gone through when you've gone through the lower levels, right? Like if you just start on the top, or you jump to the top, then people don't there's less respect. There's less, okay, you know what you're doing, or you don't know what you're doing. And so I guess one of the life lessons I look back at, which I wish I could help everybody understand, is be content in the role you find yourself in,
right.
and make that place where you're at the best it can be, right? Don't always be looking at what's the next thing I can do, what's the next thing I can do, but today, what's the best I can do where I'm at?
Right.
But also just realizing that, yeah, I mean, humility. I mean, to go back to that, right? I mean, that servant leadership that Christ teaches us, you know, I was taught as a kid that there were 3 root sins that could kind of be the root of your issues,
okay.
right? And so you can kind of look at all the different sins that you may have, and you could probably pinpoint one of these 3, which was your problem, right? And they were pride, selfishness, and sensuality. And I remember I had a priest as a spiritual director, and I remember, you know, I'd go talk to him every single week, and he would, and I was convinced my issue was selfishness. I was dead on convinced. And every week he, you know, and I'd talk to him more often than once a week, but you know, almost every time I saw him, he's like, Paul, you're proud. Paul, you're proud. I was like, nah, I'm selfish. And he's, Paul, you're proud. Nah, I'm selfish. And after about like 8 months of this, finally one day I walk in and I go, Father, I think I'm proud. He goes, whoa, amazing. Where'd you find that out? You know? And so, so then sort of that, because pride is what blinds us. Right. And so then once I realized that, and through the Lord's grace, trying to work on that and trying to figure out, okay, now how do I, you know, live according to what God is asking me to do? You start to realize, oh, there are a lot of other people better talented than I am, who know a lot more. And so I should be willing to ask their help, or to be willing to ask their opinion and not force my way. I mean, you brought up my farm. And we talked the other day how I was just shocked about how the bull in the herd, you know, manages his herd, which I think has fascinating implications.
Sure.
But like my role to that herd, when I walk up, I am always in a state of, I mean, humble submission, I suppose. I mean, these things could kill me in an instant. And I joke with my wife that the way I want to go when I'm 80 years old is I want to be run over by a bull, you know, because it'd be quick, I think. And, you know, if I'm 80 years old, I'm ready to go.
Sure.
Doing what I love, right?
Being gored by a bull.
Yeah, but my bull has no horns, thank God. But he could still trample me. And so like I go up and they come up to me, they want their head scratches, and they, you know, they want the care, but I'm realizing, yes, I'm their leader, I'm their farmer, right? But I have to recognize that I cannot control that. And I apply the same lesson with people. People hate my analogies with animals because they're like, you're just treating people like animals.
You don't want to die by being gored by a person. But other than that, the analogy
preferably not.
up.
But otherwise, because people, I can't force people to do what they don't want to do. Right. And I think that's where truth, beauty, and goodness come in. Right. Like if I want to help people realize that their child will be best served by classical education, I can't like go up and strong arm them into enrolling their child into my school. But what I can do is say, isn't this beautiful over here? Isn't this amazing? Isn't this great? Don't you want that for your child? Right. And then they make that free choice of this is what I want because I want my child to flourish, you know, as a human being. And so sort of keeping that same awe that I have in front of 1,000-pound animal, right, in face of every other human person. You know.
So let me ask you this: I've observed your character over the last few years, and I think you have one particular strength that I think you've done well with, and I want to tell it to you and get your reaction and see what you think of this. Observation. So I've observed you over the last few years put people in positions where they succeed and do so many different things kind of in the margin and on the side that I think has put people in a place where then they can flourish. And it seems to me like you're doing that intentionally.
Where I'm doing things on the margins?
Where you're doing things to kind of just a little detail here and there, and you're putting a person in a place where then they don't have to deal with the things that are not their skill set, or they are in a position where they can now pick up the mic because you have put them in that place. Do you think that's something you've done intentionally?
Yeah, it is. And part of it is my drive for efficiency.
Sure.
You know, I mean, I don't really consider efficiency to be part of human flourishing, but no, I mean, it is in the sense of, I mean, that goes back to playing to each other's strengths, right? If it takes me 5 seconds to do something that I consider menial, but it's going to save that person 5 minutes because they don't know how to do that thing, or they haven't done it 1,000 times like I have, then let me just take the 5 seconds and do it.
Sure.
Right. Now, people may say, well, you're not teaching them how to fish, right? You're giving them the fish instead of teaching them how to fish. Well, yeah, in some respect. In other respects, if it's something that they would only have to do once in their lives, there's no reason for me to teach them how to fish.
Right.
Right. You know, I mean, if somebody lives in Appalachian, Kentucky, and you go out to the ocean, I'm not going to necessarily teach them how to deep water fish because they're never coming back. Right.
Right.
And so that is something, you know, I don't mind doing the small things for multiple reasons. One is because it may be more efficient. For two, I don't think people will like to follow a leader who won't do the small things, right? If you know, and if I don't listen to what they need, right? Quality of life is a huge thing. Human flourishing, right? If you're not able to, you know, if every day you come into work and you, I don't know, hate the color of the walls in your classroom, right? With a passion. I mean, we joke about my green office, right? But which I'm happily moving out of, but I don't walk in hating it every morning.
And you're moving just downstairs. You're not
right. I'm just no down the hallway, not even down the stairs. I don't walk in hating it every day, so it's not a quality of life issue to me, right? But if I had like a bright orange room, and it would behoove me or somebody who cares about me to change the paint of that room, even if I have to be the one that comes in, you know, in paint clothes and paints it myself, right? Because I want, you know, that place to be something that's good for them. And so I think that's those sorts of things you're talking about that I, you know, I don't mind doing. But the balance becomes very hard, right? I like doing those small things because it makes people happy.
Right.
Right. But then, you know, you have those higher level things that like only you can do as the head of a school or the head of a division that you're doing curriculum, you know, consulting for or whatever. And so you can't delegate some of those things, and you've got that time balance can be hard.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Let's change gears for a second and think about classical education a little more broadly. You've worked over the last few years in classical education, specifically here and then now in Memoria Press Online Academy, but more broadly, this is kind of a movement in this country that is spreading. And I wonder what you think the role of leadership is and should be going forward in classical education more broadly.
That's a phenomenal question. I mean, I don't know that I don't pretend to have all of the answers. Let's be clear there.
Sure.
But I think as a good scholastic, I need to make a distinction, right? You have different kinds of leaders, right? You've got people that tend to be like business leaders that can make something financially stable. You have, you know, visionary leaders that, you know, can't make a deposit in the bank account if their life depended on it, but, you know, they can communicate a vision. You have, I mean, I haven't thought that one out deeply, all the divisions I'd want to make, but you have different kinds of leaders. And so I think sort of broadly as a movement, I mean, there used to be a part of me that wishes we were all completely of one mind, down to the very details. And, there was one clear direction on that. And then I started to realize that that's never been the way it is. And, even if we go and try to look back at the heyday of the liberal arts or, classical education, however you want to put it, it's always been people emphasizing different things, right? And so in the classical movement, we share in common certain principles, but there are idealists out there that say we should do it this way. And there's no way that that's ever going to happen, right? Even if we lived 1,000 years ago, it didn't happen, right? Those are great ideals and they push us to those ideals.
Right.
There's other people that say, this is what we can do. I don't know if I mentioned this on the last podcast, probably not, because I was talking about hunting so much. But one day I was reading the Jesuits' Ratio Studiorum from the 1590s. And so in the Catholic tradition, the Jesuits were like the educators par excellence. And so I was like, I wonder what they did back in the Renaissance. And I went back and I read that. And they spent 3 years or so in grammar school. And basically what they did for 6 hours a day was learn Latin. And then they get to about middle school and everything shifts to being done in Latin. So science and math and history, literature, everything was done in Latin. And I turned around at that point. My desk was right by Mrs. Lowe's desk. And I turned around and I said, Mrs. Lowe, let's do this. Let's just scrap lower school science, lower school history, lower school geography. Let's just scrap it all and just do Latin all day long in school.
Right.
And then in 7th grade, we just start doing everything in Latin.
Right.
And she kind of looks at me and she says, you convince the parents, we'll do it. and I thought, it was just, it encapsulated all of this of like, okay, as a Renaissance ideal, I get where you're coming from. But practically speaking, in something that can be successfully done here to bring today's students to human flourishing, that's not the way to go. And so I think you've got all of these different kinds of leaders within the movement, right? And you have to have your business leaders, right? If you don't have a financially sound institution, nobody has a paycheck and nobody can dedicate time to building the movement, right? And so I think there's a great value there in having this iron sharpening iron. We're all stones on the seashore getting, rubbed up against one another, but we're on the same seashore.
Yeah.
I think that's important. And I think it's important that we look and see, okay, what is this other person doing? Do I think that's in accord with the principles of what we're trying to do? Is it contrary? Is it, maybe in accord, but it's not the best in my situation? And I think for us to say, I think it's very arrogant to say we have the one best method that's the perfect thing for every certain situation. I'm a Southerner at heart, right? States' rights. There's a lot to be said for that. I grew up in the South. I suppose I could grow out of that. But local autonomy is a good thing in some respects.
Sure.
Right. And so, what classical education looks like, this is a big deal to me. What classical education looks like in the United States should be different than the way classical education looks like in Peru or in Chile or Argentina or Mexico. Why? Because as much as we share our Western tradition, they don't need to read Make Way for Ducklings in first grade in Peru. Right. They need to read, I don't know, whatever great children's books they have in Spanish. And so realizing that this movement has to take on different manifestations in its local cultures I think is a helpful thing as well.
Yeah, it sounds like you're saying that ultimately what the movement needs is for the people who are leading right now to continue leading, and for those of us who are a part of it, who are trying to carry along this tradition, to live in the tension, to allow these voices to speak and to weigh them, but not to, let that balance create a robust movement that is able to provide a viable education to many children for years and years to come.
Yeah, and I think the more we listen to all of the voices, the more we can clarify our ideas.
Yep.
Right. If we only listen to one voice, then we end up in an echo chamber. And so I think it is. And that was one thing that I started in the schools division was a book discussion where we would read different books. I don't think we've read one single Memoria Press published book in that book discussion.
Right.
They've all been from other sources to say, okay, now let's discuss this and let's see, is there anything that we need to take from this? Is this stuff we're already doing, and learn from it that way.
Yeah. So in conclusion, we agree that the multi-marketing Britney Spears mic guy is not the picture of leadership that we want. But, ultimately, I think the point you made about Christ being the model of leadership and human flourishing being the goal of leadership kind of shows why two guys like us can talk about leadership. There's, we're not particularly, special leaders like anybody else. It's just that everyone is called to bear the cost of responsibility to increase the flourishing of others. And for some, that looks like it's called leadership by many, and for some it's not. But for those who are in schools or perhaps trying to help, lead in their home in education, what would you say is the one thing that they should think about to help them to be a better leader in an educational context and to help students to flourish by having a rigorous, solid educational plan for their life?
You're going to narrow me down to one?
Just one.
Okay. Well, I think if I only get one, I have to go back to what I referenced with the cows. Okay. What I realized as I watched my herd the other day was there's a give and take between the leading of the herd and the herd leading the leader. And so because when I first got my herd, my watering system wasn't set up. And so I had these 200-gallon tanks that every day, maybe twice a day or whatever, I'd have to go fill up with a hose. And the bull, Pablo, he likes running water. The other cows, heifer number 9, she likes running water too. But I think it's more because they like to be around me, right? They're more people cows than the others. But what will happen is I go out to fill up the water and the herd comes over, right? Led by Pablo. Pablo's one like, ooh, fresh water coming. I'm going over there. And when he comes, they all come over. And there was one point where I had the tanks about, 30 feet apart. And I filled one up. I went over to go fill up the other one. And Pablo followed. And then the rest of the herd followed. And again, I'm kind of intimidated by 1,000-pound animals. And I'm like, just stay over at the other tank. But no, they come over. But then I'm still filling up the tank. Plenty of fresh water. The herd turns around and leaves. Pablo's the last one at the fresh water, but he realizes everybody else is left, and he turns around and he goes with the herd. And I looked at that and I was like, that's really, really interesting.
Yeah.
Because most of the time I see him being the one that's going somewhere and the rest of the herd follows him, right? That's a leader, right? That's what we think of as a leader.
Right.
But he realized in that moment, anthropomorphism onto my cow, that he needed to be with his herd, right? He can't be a leader out by himself drinking his own water. He's got to be with the herd.
Right.
And so I think if you're thinking about leading a school, you've got to be in the classes. You've got to be, you have to show up at, when your faculty is eating lunch in the faculty lounge, you've got to be around. If you're a homeschooler, right, you can't just tell your child, well, go read that, and they never see you reading, or they never see you, you never engage or ask them questions, right? And this goes to dads of homeschooling families, right? Do you ever show that you're engaged with your children's education?
Right.
Because you're also a leader of the schooling at home, right? And so showing that you're in that you're part of it, then gives you to be pragmatic and utilitarian capital when that that person that your child doesn't want to learn what you want them to learn, right? I mean, Pablo, because he followed the herd, he has capital when he wants to leave the herd and he wants them to follow him, right?
Right.
And so by showing that, oh no, we're in this together, then I think you have more capital than to say, okay, now we need to go this way.
Yeah.
And I think that's important, because otherwise, if you're not with the people that you're leading, you have nobody to lead anywhere.
Yeah, it's well said. I've heard the analogy of, the best pastors, in the Bible, pastors are called shepherds sometimes, and good shepherds smell like sheep. And that kind of seems like the idea that you're getting at.
I love that. Well, and even you think about, the biblical analogy, right, of a shepherd, they slept out with their sheep. They didn't get to go into a cushy home.
Yeah.
Right. They had to find a place in the field to sleep as they went from field to field.
Right.
Yep. So be with your people, right?
Yeah.
And Augustine says that in his work on catechizing, on teaching catechumens the faith. He just talks about how it's just so vital when you're teaching and therefore leading that you have a relationship with the person that you're teaching. And because otherwise, why would they learn from you?
Yeah. That's great. Well, Paul, it's always wisdom from the farm when you're on the podcast. So I appreciate you coming on again.
It's been great to be here, and I look forward to the next time.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Classical Etc. If you want to show support for the video, then you can hit the thumbs up icon below to give it a like. Or if you want to leave a comment, you can tell me what conversations you'd like me to have in the future. Check out our Memoria Press YouTube channel to find tons of other educational resources. And also a huge thank you to the Memoria Press Podcast Network. This is Classical Etc., and I'll see you next time.